Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the Johns Hopkins School of Education Master of Science in Education, Educational Studies and Interdisciplinary Studies, and also the Graduate Certificate in Urban Education Virtual Information Session. My name is Sion John. I'm the Assistant Director of Admissions here at the Johns Hopkins School of Education. Also, I have my colleague from the Office of Admissions, and he will introduce himself.
Thank you, Sion. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you're logging in from. My name is James McCarty. I'm the Associate Director of Admission here at Johns Hopkins for the School of Education. I just want to say congratulations to all of you. And I'm congratulating you for taking that first step. The first step in the next chapter of your educational and possibly professional career and journey. And my message for all of you before we jump in today to talk about our program and what we have to offer here at Johns Hopkins is just to share that I know that this can seem like a huge daunting task. It might seem very, very anxious and nerve-wracking for many of you. And my message is that you are never going through this process alone. Myself and my team here in admissions, our goal is to walk with you every step of the way through the admissions and application process. My contact information will be at the end of the program on the screen. So please feel free to reach out, set up a meeting with me, whether it's via Zoom or phone, so we can chat, connect. And again, I look forward to working with all of you through every step through enrolling here at Johns Hopkins. Thank you all. Enjoy the program today, and I look forward to chatting with you all real soon. Take care.
Thank you, James. Finally presenting today, we have Professor and Program Lead, Dr. Eric Rice. And before we get started, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping topics. First, today's webinar is being recorded. We'll be able to share a link to the recorded video after the event is complete. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Please type your question in the Q&A box and we will answer your questions. I'd like to share the agenda for today's virtual webinar. We'll kick off the presentation, share an overview of the Johns Hopkins School of Education. Then Dr. Rice will go over program information on the two programs. Lastly, we'll wrap it up with admissions requirements, go over financial aid, and leave the floor open for questions at the end. And to start, we are one of 9 schools at Johns Hopkins University. We began offering college courses for teachers in 1909, and then we became our own school in 2007. We're proud to share that the Johns Hopkins School of Education is consistently ranked one of the top schools in education by the U.S. News and World Report. For school enrollment, we have approximately 1,741 students. And we offer 25 graduate programs, which includes our doctoral, master's, and graduate certificate programs. And we have a network of over 24,000 SOE alums. And for faculty introduction, Dr. Eric Rice is an assistant clinical professor at the Johns Hopkins School of Education, where he teaches and does research about urban school reform, the social context of education and education equities. His research includes school funding, teacher leadership, charter schools, and urban school reform. And his current projects include an analysis of the discourse around school funding in Baltimore City. In addition, he is currently working on a research project looking at how youth experience restorative practices in Baltimore City. At this time, I'll hand the floor over to Dr. Rice. Welcome, Dr. Rice.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really glad to get to talk a little bit about these programs, and I hope that I'll be able to answer any questions that you might have. So if you want to go to the next slide, I'm going to talk first about the Master of Science in Education. And this is a long and confusing title, but essentially this is a track within the educational studies concentration of our Masters of Science in Education. So the degree is the Master of Science in Education, and this is our most flexible degree. And it's the interdisciplinary option because you do have the ability to kind of customize it and to take coursework from multiple different areas. So if you can go to the next slide. This degree is designed for educators who have an interest in a customized course of study to really allow you to hone in on your personal, professional, and career goals. Because of that flexibility, it can range from 33 to 39 credits. And I do want to be clear that the program does not lead to teacher certification. It is not meant to be an initial training program for new teachers. Now, there are ways to tie it to some other certification that I'll get to towards the end, but it is not meant for initial certification. And there are two options within the degree program called pathways. In pathway, both options allow you to start from one or more of our graduate certificate programs and use those potentially in combination with electives to create a pathway that allows you to meet your own goals. So pathway one, you choose one of our graduate certificate programs, and we'll cover what those options are in a few minutes. And you combine that with some core coursework, a course called Advanced Instructional Strategies, a research course, and the capstone course, Seminar and Teacher Leadership. And then you have room for some electives, and that's where on pathway one, the interdisciplinary nature of the degree comes in. So let's say, for example, that you were interested in urban education as your core pathway, but maybe you wanted to take a couple of extra courses in, what do we know about neuroscience in the brain and how does that influence education? Or maybe you happen to work with gifted students in an urban area and you wanted to take a couple of gifted courses. That's how this option comes together. So it's the certificate, the 3 core courses, and enough electives to hit that minimum threshold of 33 credits. Pathway 2 is where you want to go a little bit more in depth into 2 areas. So, to take some of the examples I was using there, you could combine urban education with gifted education if you really wanted to go, equally in depth into those 2. So when you do the 2 certificate pathway, in addition to the 2 certificates, you take the capstone core course, but you're excused from the other core courses. And while you can take electives, we're always happy to work with you to take an additional course. You're not required to take any electives. So that really is where we have 2 graduate certificates that hit your main 2 areas of interest. So if you could go to the next slide. Here are the graduate certificates that we offer and that people base the program around. They're organized here into kind of 2 lists. The first side, on the left side, are candidates who are interested in educational fields, but who do not require additional credentials. So you do get the graduate certificate and the master's degree, but these don't lead to, say, a certification credential. So we have urban education, which I'll talk more about in the second half of the presentation today. We have mind, brain, and teaching that looks at the recent research on neurobiology and what the implications are for teaching. We have educational leadership for independent schools, which is pretty clear for people who are working in independent schools and want to learn more about leading independent schools. Leadership and technology integration, which is a part of our digital age learning and educational technology offerings. So really looks at what do we know about how to effectively integrate technology into your classroom, and then a graduate certificate in autism. None of those certificates require that you be a teacher. But many of the people in the program are teachers who are, interested in furthering their knowledge in one of those areas. On the right side, we have 2 graduate certificates that do lead to a certification endorsement. So as I said earlier, the degree is not intended for initial certification, but there are ways to get an additional endorsement on your teacher certification. So those are a graduate certificate in gifted education, which focuses on education of gifted and talented, as well as some interesting issues around twice exceptional learners and so on. And that can lead to the Maryland State endorsement for certification for teaching gifted students. And then there's the graduate certificate in school administration and supervision. And again, that can lead to the Maryland State endorsement for, it's called the Admin 1 certification that allows you to move into the principal track. Now, those are, whether or not your state has reciprocity with Maryland and whether that certification would work for you. Maryland has reciprocity with most states, but if that's an interest of yours, I'd encourage you to reach out directly to the advisors in those programs to find out, or reach out to me and I can on that. So this program, what really unifies it, I would say, is kind of 4 characteristics, right? So one is that you have at least 1 concentration, your first certificate. Combined with other interdisciplinary work, whether that's a second certificate or whether that is additional core coursework and electives. You've got a minimum of 33 credits. You have some exposure to research, whether that's the research course in the core courses or whether that's through the offerings in the graduate certificates. And you've got that shared capstone course. And I want to say just a little bit about that capstone course. Some of the certificates do have internal capstones, but the master's capstone is called the Seminar in Teacher Leadership. And it is a course that allows you to really pose an educational problem that you're passionate about. Do a little bit of a lit review about what do we know about that problem, do a stakeholder analysis about how individuals in your context might feel about it, and come up with an action plan that you can use to move your career forward. Now, so for example, to go back to that example of working with, say, combining urban ed and gifted ed, you might do a project that looks at how do we do a better job of identifying the many gifted students in our urban areas, and that you're not required to implement it. That's for you to move forward in your career, but that would be a way that you could put together a plan for how you might go about changing your practice in your context. So this is the certificates here. The ones on the left side are open to people who are not necessarily in public education, already have certification. The ones on the right side, you would be required to have certification already to take those programs. So I'm going to pause for a minute. I can go right into the graduate certificate in urban education, but I wanted to see if there's any immediate questions about this structure for the interdisciplinary option and the Master's of Science in Education. So if you do have a question, I guess you have to type it in, or I don't know if we're able to unmute people or anything, but I'll pause for just a second and answer any questions there before I move on to talk about the specifics of the graduate certificate in urban education.
And Dr. Rice, is it possible to complete this degree completely online for those who are interested in like a completely online program?
It is. All of these certificates have online versions. The only time that we may need to make an adjustment, as of now, one of the core courses, it's called Advanced Instructional Strategies, does not have an online version. And so if somebody wants to do the one certificate pathway fully online, we just find a different course focused on either curriculum or instruction or methods to substitute for that course. So that's everything else is offered fully online. We've been moving everything online, over the past couple of years, but, accelerated by the pandemic. But we can find a way for you to do the program fully online. It's actually easier to do it online than it is to do it in face-to-face at this point in time.
It looks like we have a question. Dr. Rice, it looks like it's a program-related question.
Is this program, so it is, I wouldn't say that it's not required that you be a certified teacher. But if you, for example, so if you're talking about educational leadership certification, like to become a principal or a department head or what have you, so that if you were using the certificate in school administration and supervision, that certificate does require that you are a certified teacher with 27 months of experience, so 3 years basically. And so for most districts, it does meet that requirement for moving forward in the leadership track into school administration and supervision. But the master's itself does not require that you be a certified teacher. So I don't know if that makes sense. I'm happy to say more about it if you'd like. Any other questions specifically about the master's?
Dr. Rice, I have a question that we get frequently in the Office of Admissions. Is there a thesis involved, in this master's program?
So there's not a requirement for a thesis. As I talked about the capstone course earlier, it's kind of an analysis of an educational problem, a stakeholder analysis, and an action plan. We have had students who have had an interest in doing a thesis, and we've worked with them through a course called the Graduate Project. So if that's something that someone's really interested in doing and extending that project beyond the action plan into a full thesis, that's something that we can work with people to accomplish, but it's not a requirement of the program.
All right, thank you, Dr. Rice. Should I move on to the next slide?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about the graduate certificate in urban education. So some of you may be thinking about that as one option for you. And so hopefully you will have an interest in what I'm going to say about this. For others, this will give you a sense of how the different certificates work. You know, they're all 5 or 6 courses. And so much of what I'm going to say here, you know, it would be a different set of courses, but it will give you a sense of how the certificates themselves are organized and how that might fit into the wider masters. So the graduate certificate in urban education is an 18 credit certificate. Of those 18, 3 credits are the research course that's required towards the master's. So if you're doing the 1 certificate master's, this counts as your 15 credits for your concentration, plus it counts as the research course. And it's designed to assist, it says early career, but really I think any teachers and other educational professionals can benefit from it. We've had school board members, we've had people who work in research shops for urban school districts. We've had after school program coordinators. But to really dig in to understand, value, and contribute to the rich tapestry of schools and communities in urban settings. So it has a focus on deeply understanding urban residents and the processes that make particularly US urban areas the way they are. It has a real focus on creating strong partnerships between schools, families, and communities. And then a focus on leadership and developing the leadership skills necessary for leading change. And so this can be used as a part of the interdisciplinary MS. So on the next slide, you'll see the coursework for the program. There are 3 courses that everybody takes. Social context of urban education that really looks at the way kind of race, class, and culture and language, just categories of difference operate in urban areas to exclude some people and include others. And what we might do about that, right? We look at culturally responsive pedagogy and culturally sustaining pedagogy. There's a first course in school, family, and community collaboration. And there's a teaching, learning, and leadership for successful urban schools course. Everybody in the certificate takes that. And then you can choose for your additional 2 courses, a track that focuses either on an additional partnership course and urban school reform, a policy focus that looks at that same school reform course and then the politics of education, or a pedagogy track that looks at culturally responsive teaching and an additional course in urban pedagogy. And then finally, everybody does take the evaluation and research and education. Now for classroom teachers, they can take an action research course instead, if that's more applicable to their circumstance. So on the next slide, I talked just a little bit about some of the benefits, although I'm not seeing, oh, there it is. So about why you might pursue graduate education, particularly in urban area. So I think that for anybody working in urban areas, the advanced study of social context and the processes that have formed urban areas is just hugely beneficial. I'm actually going to be right after this on my way to DC to teach a section of this class there tonight on the social context of urban education and looking at the processes of residential segregation and the school to prison pipeline and how they've impacted urban schools. Has a strong focus on social justice in line with the School of Ed's mission, the opportunity to really dig deeply into policy and school reform. And I think it prepares you for, outside of careers like teaching, for things like educational consultants, for school, family, and community partnerships, after school programs, things of that sort, beyond just the possibility of being a teacher or a principal in a school. And then I did just want to talk about, on the next slide, some of the events that you have access to at Johns Hopkins. So this is something that's, this is still the draft flyer. It's going to come out later this week. But a couple of faculty, along with some advanced graduate students, are organizing a symposium on restorative justice in education. So this would certainly be open to anyone in the Hopkins community. It's going to be open to the public. But I did just want to mention that when you're a part of the Hopkins family, there are a lot of events that are open to you that I think are really helpful and exciting. This one's really looking at the relationship between school-based restorative practices and anti-racist efforts, and the ways that that restorative practices can help us move forward in anti-racist movements. However, the ways that sometimes they might hinder that by, who decides what the state that we restore in schools in? If that state is unequal that's being restored, then restorative practices might ultimately fail to move us towards our anti-racist goals. So I did just want to include this. This is going to happen in early May. You'd be welcome, whether you decide to come to Johns Hopkins or not. But I did just want to say that specifically around urban education, but also in the master's, that we do have all kinds of exciting events that you can be a part of, when you're at Johns Hopkins, and that relate directly to the content of the urban education graduate certificate, with its focus on equity and social justice. So that's all I have on urban ed. I don't know whether you want me to go over the admissions requirements, or if you're gonna to go there, or if there are any questions at this point about the urban ed certificate.
And for the urban education grad cert program, Dr. Rice, is it offered online, in person, or is it both?
Right now it's both. I will say that we've had more and more demand for it to be online. And so the last couple of years, we have not run a face-to-face cohort. We have a large number of applications of students interested in a face-to-face cohort this year. So I'm hopeful that we might actually be able to do it both this year. It will definitely be online, and we may also have a face-to-face group.
Thank you, Dr. Rice. And students can complete this just as a grad cert as well, right? Rather than a master's.
Yeah, it can be taken as a standalone graduate certificate if somebody's not interested in a master's, but is just interested in the content. And that's true of all of our graduate certificates, by the way. But they, the ones that I outlined on the, a few slides ago, can also be used either to build from one certificate with the core courses and electives for the master's, or combined with a second certificate and the capstone to make up the interdisciplinary master's.
Thank you, Dr. Rice. And we can take over for admissions for the admissions related slides. All right, so now we're going to continue by going over the application requirements. Applicants must submit a completed application, which can be found on our school's website. The application fee is $80. Next, we'll need official transcripts, including institutions you may have taken courses but did not receive a degree. Again, this is from all post-secondary institutions that you have attended. You'll need to submit an essay. And please know, as part of the application process, you must write an essay describing how the program will contribute towards your future plans. And then the essay for admission to the two-certificate pathway must address how the certificates will work together to foster your future plans. You'll need a current resume, CV, 2 letters of recommendation, and excuse me, if you're unable to have one academic letter of recommendation, we'll accept 2 professional letters of recommendation. And finally, the GRE is not required for this program. I do want to note that prospective students planning to apply to the individualized interdisciplinary MS Ed Studies program option should consult with Dr. Rice about which pathway best meets your needs before you apply for this program. And if you're an international student, there are a few additional steps you need to take. You must submit a TOEFL or IELTS score, and if your degree was completed outside of the US, you'll need to complete a course-by-course evaluation. Additional information can be found on our school's website. And the tuition for the 2022-2023 academic school year is $918 per credit for face-to-face, and for online courses, $972 plus a $20 per credit technology fee. This excludes textbook, course materials, graduation fee, and registration fee. Please note additional fees apply and are charged separately from tuition. We encourage you to view our tuition fees page on our school's website for the most up-to-date information on tuition and fees, so that you can understand the complete picture of the costs associated with becoming a student here at Johns Hopkins School of Education. And if you're interested in applying for financial aid, we strongly encourage you to apply for financial aid when you start your application. We do offer a limited number of partial need-based institutional scholarships each year. The endowed scholarships awards range on average from $500 to $1,500 per semester and are applied to tuition expenses beginning in the fall semester. To learn if you qualify or have any questions regards to financial aid, please visit our school's website. Thank you for attending today's virtual information session. At this time, Dr. Rice and I would like to open up the floor for questions. And while we wait for questions, Dr. Rice, another frequently asked question we get is students who plan on working full-time and attending school part-time, how many hours on schoolwork should they allocate approximately per week?
So for a typical 3-credit course, we normally, a rule of thumb is maybe 8 to 10 hours a week. So that would normally be in a face-to-face course, there'd be 3 hours of course meeting, several hours of reading, and a couple hours of working on assignments. That looks a little different in online courses, and there are a couple of accelerated courses in the School of Ed where they pack a full 3-credit course into half the time. That's common in the school administration and supervision program, for example. So those would be correspondingly more work, just because it's same amount of work compressed into half the weeks. But I'd say 8 to 10 hours is about that average for a 3-credit course.
Thank you, Dr. Rice. And what would you say would be your ideal candidate? Because we get this question often as well too. Any tips in regards to submitting a strong application?
Yeah, it's a little bit, because this degree is so flexible, it's a little bit hard to answer that, because it's going to depend partly on what certificates you're interested in. But I would say the piece that's common to all of it is your passion, right? This is teaching is a difficult career, education is a difficult career, but it's a really rewarding career. And I think what we all look for in the applications is people having a real passion for the work that they're doing, for the learning that they want to be involved in, and for their the ways that they connect to the educational system. And so I would say that would be that essay on how this fits into your long-term plans for yourself is a really important piece of this. And I see a question about how to contact me. I would just email directly to schedule a conversation. My name's pretty tricky. It's got the same letters in the first name as it does in the last name. You take the E off of Eric and put it at the end, and it's Rice. And Eric Rice at jhu.edu, erice at jhu.edu works. I have all the good aliases. So if you get those letters in there, I'm probably going to get the email. But Eric Rice at jhu.edu. If feel free to put, if you've got, I'm pretty sure this is what I want to do, but I wanted to talk about options. Feel free to put that in the email. But if you just want to start fresh and I just want to talk about the degree, happy to start there.
And the final question I have for you, Dr. Rice, is, are you accepting application for the summer semester, this upcoming summer semester?
Yeah, we are. I believe that all the certificates are still accepting applications as well. For summer, I believe the priority deadline, and you correct me if I'm wrong on this, but for financial aid, I think the priority deadline is April 1st. We will still look at applications after that, but it can be, if you're looking for financial aid, it's ideal to get that application in prior to April 1st. But we can still look at applications. This program, the master's and urban ed, are each rolling admissions, where we'll look at applications as long as there are spots available in the courses. We'll look at applications, basically until they're full. So sometimes that's all the way up until a few weeks ahead of time. Most of the certificates will also do that. Depends again on how full a particular program is getting. I will say, just on that notion of that idea of financial aid, part of, I talked about the kind of intellectual flexibility and programmatic flexibility in the interdisciplinary masters. There's also a lot of flexibility in how quickly you go through the program, right? So some people plug away one course a semester for several years, and that works fine for them. Other people like to do it pretty quickly, and usually we can arrange a program that will allow you to complete the master's in as little as 1.5 years. Certainly in 2 years. I've had 1 or 2 students do it in a single year, with the summer semester, but that's a heavy lift. But the one thing I wanted to say about the flexibility is, if you do need financial aid, you need to be a half-time student, which means effectively taking 4.5 credits, which means effectively taking 6 credits each semester.
All right, thank you, Dr. Rice. So moving on to the next slide. So some important contact information, any admissions related questions in regards to your application, please reach out to my colleague, James McCarty. Email, phone numbers on the slide. Any program related question to Ms. Lisa McNeil and also Dr. Eric Rice. Thank you again for your interest in the Johns Hopkins School of Education. Thank you to Dr. Rice for your time and the wonderful presentation. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. Thank you.
My pleasure. Take care.